minutes, and I'm really excited to just share with you a little bit about your community. This is not my home community, but this is a community that's very similar to where I grew up. So with that, we're going to get started. My name is Mandy Sherger. I am married to Christopher Sherger, and we have a little guy, Charlie, who's 2. And we are transplants here, Chris from north of Dayton, Ohio, and myself from Decatur County. And I grew up on a farm in southeastern Decatur County, and you can go ahead and flip the, I don't know what kind of a nod you want. I grew up on a farm in Decatur County, a small hobby farm. My father was a full-time farmer and a full-time tool engineer. If any of you are farmers or know a farmer, you're always full-time. And we grew up in a very close-knit Christian community, very non-diverse, and just a rich in love, rich in family, rich in traditions, rich in everything that is small town. And so that's kind of who I am. I since have become a wife and a mom, and through a series of events, I went to Purdue to find a farming husband, and I will let you know that Mr. Sugar is not that, so I was not successful at Purdue. And so I went off to find an agricultural career. And through many things after 9/11, it turned into a human resource career, and then eventually I found myself in the middle of Houston, Texas. Single, he and I did not get married till later in life, single, living with a family around the age of 28, where I now was the minority. So I all of a sudden had a very different experience from my southeastern Indiana roots, farming community roots, and became a teacher down there, and absolutely fell in love with a student population of English learners. And these were children who, for no reason of their own, had found themselves in American schools trying to learn English and trying to figure out a culture that they maybe did not know. So I started helping them, and then ended up back in Indianapolis in front of a wonderful lady named Barbara Fenja, and she was getting ready to start such program here in Franklin Township. Actually, it was her second year of starting that program in 2005. And so we had a great conversation that day, and I was so fortunate to be invited to be a part of that original team in 2005 when we rolled out EL education here in Franklin Township. So, what is EL? The reason I wanted to add this is not an educational lecture, but I want to tell you what an English language learner is, because all of the statistics that you're getting ready to see are based on this person. So an English language learner is a person who's learned any other languages or language before they've learned English. And we identify them here in the state of Indiana and then attempt to get them proficient we do actually get them proficient in English in reading, writing, listening, and speaking. And so that's what an EL is. So here's some statistics here in Franklin Township. These are our neighbors. We have, as of this last year, about this time, 822 English language learners in our school system, and that's K-12. And of those 822, as of a year ago, there was about 45 languages. My hunch is that's more. And the reason I say that is because we're receiving more and more children from refugees, and oftentimes their languages are multiple because they're coming from tribal languages or town languages or small city languages. So that's some interesting data. Now this is a rolling of our history. So you can see in the 90s we had about 50 language learners here in our township. Then Mrs. Fenja and the Franklin Township Corporation decided that there was started to become a need for language education here in the Franklin Township area. So around 2003, 2004, they started to see those numbers doubling. And that's when the program started. And so you can see when we were hired in at 05, 06, the following year we nearly doubled again. Then we tracked our data for several years, and then around 2010 was the last redistricting, and we started to do a little bit different with within our program of how we educated our parents, and this data was what we were tracking for our parents. So we started to do more outreach, and we started to do more parent involvement activities and parent involvement things. So we didn't have. That's why you see a lapse in data. So you can assume from 2009 to 2016, it just continued to grow at increments. But I don't have that data, that's why. And up until last year where we had 822. Just as an interesting piece of information, there are 8 of us who work as EL educators here in Franklin Township right now, between all the schools. And here's how our numbers break out as of a year ago. Oh, we might want to go back to that. You can kind of study. I don't know, can you read the numbers back there? Okay. So we have a fairly high concentration of kiddos that we work with at Arlington, Bunker Hill, Thompson Crossing, and Kitley. And Kitley would be the children that live in these neighborhoods that we're in right now. Our goal, of course, is always proficiency. So our goal would be to see these children, these numbers getting less and less as the school ages go on. You can see we have 50 at the high school. Number one, that's just sheer statistics in how big our high school is. Number two, we are seeing an influx of older students coming over with little language. Okay. Okay, we're going to do an activity. Now, I like to do this anytime I give cultural presentations. I've been invited to cultural presentations, actually, kind of a couple different places. I do it with our teachers. I also have gone up to, I was fortunate to go up to West Lafayette and do it with an educational group up there. And to me, it helps me kind of get in the mindset of changing cultures when we do an activity such as this. So there are 3x5 cards on your table. I promise no one has to get up or move, or I'm trying to make it as comfortable as possible. And we can go ahead and go. I need you to write 5 I am statements about yourself. So, for instance, my first slide where I introduced myself, and I listed all the things that I was. I'm a mom, I'm a wife, I'm a Christian, you just list 5 of those. I'll give you a few minutes. That social media is something else, isn't it? I can't believe how much it's changed in my lifetime. Okay, now, we are going to be in a pretend world for a minute, and I have a magic wand, and I'm going to start taking away some of your identities. But it's your choice. Mark off 1. Mark off 1. Whichever one you feel like I could take away from myself, you really don't want to, but that one is not as important as the other 4. Poof, mark off 2. Boom, mark off 3. Now you are down to 2, correct? Are you happy with those 2? Do you feel if you just could identify yourself as those 2, that you would be satisfied with where your life is, with where you've lived, with what you've done? Mark 1 more out. Yeah. Does it hurt a little? Yeah. that usually cuts into your family. That usually cuts into your heart a little bit more. You know, it's easy to let go of. You can flip and show mine when I started twitching a little when I did mine. It was hard to make those red and mark them out. I can give up Houston. I can give up Purdue. Doesn't really make me who I am, but I bet I would have made it. But taking away my mom's status, he's a foster son. I was 41 when a newborn was laid in my arms. That hurt. That hurt. So why'd I do this? Why'd I do this? This activity is an example of what assimilation is. Assimilation is differing cultures that are absorbed into a dominant culture. Moving into an area that you didn't grow up in. Moving into an area that you didn't want to go to. Culture groups will eventually become indistinguishable from other members of the society. One of our groups in this particular township that I kind of identify in this particular statement is our Hispanic culture. I have many, many students that are brought to me from teachers that he's Hispanic, he must be a language learner. Upon further investigation, he's a fourth-generation Hispanic. His family has been in the Americas, and mom and dad are working at Eli Lilly. He's not a language learner. He's not pulled from his culture. This is his culture. He just happens to be Hispanic. And his family happens to have been born in Mexico. My family happened to have been born in Ireland and Scotland and Germany. I just have been 9 generations in this country, and I'm sure many of you have similar stories. It sometimes is forced. We're seeing this with our refugees. Oftentimes it's voluntary. We have a beautiful country that is rich and free. And we have open borders that allow for those freedoms, like our ancestors came many, many years ago. We just studied Thanksgiving, and it's always that's one of my favorite parts to teach the kids, because it's really exciting for them to hear about these pilgrims and about these experiences and these processes of coming over, and that those were our ancestors, my ancestors. It is very rare, however, for a minority group to completely replace its previous practices. So they're going to keep, oftentimes you'll find culture groups keep the language, keep their food, keep their traditions. We had sauerkraut at our Thanksgiving Christmas activities that we did yesterday with my family, because sauerkraut was it was sausage casserole, which has been passed down generation to generation, and there it sat in 2017. So this activity was meant to just explain, and anytime I teach about our cultures here in the township or just cultural diversity in general, it's very easy to get comfortable. And when you're taken out of your culture, for me, my experience was going to Houston, where I was the minority. I learned a lot through that process. And I was only down there 3 years, but it was very evident to me that was not where there were different little beliefs that I didn't realize in our own country that we had that many differences, especially at a candle party when I was called a Yankee. I said, I am? I guess I am. So I'm now going to switch over and share with you, we have multiple languages, 45 or more to be exact. I picked 3 top cultures that I personally am seeing are to be our 3 highest culture groups or highest languages here in the township. The first one is Spanish. And Oh, but first we're going to talk about what is culture. We'll go through this pretty quick. It refers not only to the racial and ethnic groups that we were born in, but also the different groups that we choose to belong. For instance, our religious affiliations. It also is a combination of thoughts, feelings, beliefs, values, behavior patterns that are in those groups. It provides a guideline of how we live each day, and we can cross over into different culture groups. So that's a little bit about what culture is. The first is Spanish, which is Latin America. Most of our kiddos come from Latin America. Rarely do we have someone from Spain. And when you talk about culture, there are many different things that we could go into. And as a matter of fact, last evening I started to have to cut because I realized my passion sometimes is longer than an hour. And so I would continue to talk about all the different differences that we do have. So here are some clothing differences, just traditional clothing differences from around the world in our Latino cultures. I think there's about 4 or 5. This is from Argentina to Venezuela. Mexico in the far right corner. Puerto Rico, the top right corner. Uruguay. And then religion is the other piece that I decided to pick on, to talk about today. Latin American religions primarily are 90%, in the 60s, 900, hold on, let me start over. In the early 1900s, it was primarily Catholic, Roman Catholic. I did a little bit of research and found out that today, only about 69% of adults identify themselves as Catholic. So I dug into that research to find out why that has gone. Some of it has been just dropping religion completely. Actually, I think that's where a majority of it is. Some of it has been evangelical Christians and their and what we do, our work that we do with our missionaries is making a change. I picked a holiday celebration for each culture group just to kind of show you some of the things that I've seen my kids in the elementary schools do. Dia de los Muertos looks like a very scary holiday that happens around Halloween. However, it's a very lovely and endearing holiday if you get to know what they are doing. They are actually celebrating their dead loved ones that have gone before them. And they have a celebration for that. And the children all are aware of what that's for. And typically there's some sort of a shrine set up in their homes, in their churches, in their communities to celebrate those people. Okay, our next group are our Indian friends that are here in Franklin Township that I wanted to talk about. I probably know second most about this particular group because Kitley and Acton pull right around this area, as I said, and we have right here at the edge of Acton Road a Gurdwara, which is a Sikh temple, and many of my students for the last 12 years have been members of that temple or members of that culture group, and they love to share their culture with me. And I have an international fair each spring at Kitley, and last year was combined with Acton. And so I've learned a lot about their culture over the last few years. And so I was really excited when I put this together because what I actually did was I actually pulled a presentation that a former student of mine did and just embedded it in my PowerPoint. So here you go. Many times you see our Indian friends wearing this on their head. Typically, the men or boys are the ones that are wearing the headdresses. It is not uncommon for a girl or woman to wear a headdress, but usually this kind of a headdress where the hair is tied up, that is actually usually reserved for the male part of their culture. The one on the left is called a jura. And that's just a knot of hair. Oftentimes it looks like a doily that's tied off with a rubber band. A padka is in the middle. That's what we see a lot. Those two are the ones that we see on our elementary kiddos. And as they get older, we see more of the padka and the turban. So that's a little bit about the hair coverings. The Sikh population, which are the ones who worship right down here that are truly our neighbors, are here down on the right. These are called saris. The women usually always have to have your head covered like a Jewish culture in their place of worship. Then we also have quite a bit of Hindu. This would be just not from the Punjab Sikh culture. So the Sikh culture is from Punjab, India. It's an area of India. Actually, it's a state of India. And amazingly enough, they're farmers. That's what they do in their hometown or in their home country. Hindu would mostly be, there's other religions, but the next is Hindu that we see in our school systems. So that's a traditional woman's dress. One thing that I've always added in is to educate that they are not Muslim. They are not the Quran and all of the news media that we hear around the world of the Muslim and the terrorism and the things that sometimes happen with some of those groups because they wear a headdress. So this is some traditional Muslim headdress. So you can see there's a difference in the headdresses that they wear. They also are very favorable to decorate their skin. I think here in America we call those tattoos and piercings. But here this would be probably a wedding to the right, and they're doing some other things on the left. I believe that's a Hindu, and I don't know as much about that, but I wanted to show a picture of that. And then they also have something called Mandy, and the children love Mandy. It is a temporary tattoo made from the henna plant. And the Punjabi, the Sikh culture, love to do this for fun, for celebrations, for parties, and it is very common for them to come in to school with Mandy on their hand, and they get so excited when I ask about what they did over the weekend, because there's usually a story that goes along with it. Or sometimes my sister was practicing. I get that too. This was a visual that I found online. I don't have, this was just to show different religions in India. The one I know the most about is the Sikh religion. Interestingly enough, this is Mayor Joe Hogsett. He visited last summer our Gurdwara down here at Acton Road. So I just wanted to show you, I was looking for some pictures of that Gurdwara, and here's one. This is a Hindi religious picture of worship. And one of the things that they all seem to have in common from India is the love of their Taj Mahal. And their Taj Mahal is I'm behind here. It is, this is written by a student, so I'll read it to you. Taj Mahal is a symbol of love. It took 17 years to complete. The king made the palace for his wife because he loved her. It took 22,000 people to build it, and they oftentimes go there for visits when they go over back to their country. And one of their holidays or celebration is Diwali. Diwali is a celebration and festival of lights. It's oftentimes the end of middle to end of October, something like that. We just had Diwali actually, and it is not a religious holiday, but they decorate and celebrate their country with lights. Kind of reminds me of our Independence Day, but it doesn't have anything to do with our independence either. So it's just a celebration. And this is the last group that I wanted to touch on today because we are seeing such an influx of the Burma culture here in Franklin Township. I will be honest, this is the one culture group I don't know as much about, simply because this is a very new phenomenon here in the state of Indiana. I will tell you, I did some research, and there are 2 excellent articles in IndyStar.com about the folks that have settled mostly in the Perry Township, but we're seeing them move towards actually in all of this area. I personally at Acton and Kitley have never worked with a Burmese student, so much of this data that I'm getting ready to share with you was shared with me from a colleague of mine, Stephanie Donnelly, who has a pretty large population at Thompson Crossing. Their traditional clothing This is actually a picture from a festival that they go to in Atlanta, which we'll talk about in a minute. And here's their religion and the breakdown of their religion. Mostly Buddhism in their country. But what the teachers and I have been hearing from the children and from what we are hearing from our families and the adults that we get a chance to talk to through an interpreter, which gets tricky because there are so many different languages in this culture, is that they have been brought here from something called the Exodus. I have it in here. The Exodus Refugee Immigration of Indianapolis, that has Christian ties. So typically, most of our Burmese here are Christian. These are some quotes that I pulled out just because it really, like I said, I don't know as much about Burma, and so when I was doing my research to prepare today for you, these just hit heartstrings with me, mostly because this is my passion, one of my passions, but also I just felt like it was important to highlight. Religious persecution, forced labor, and torture were a prelude to freedoms to the Christian Chin. Chin is another name for Burmese. A religious minority in Burma, the Chin are a religious minority in Burma. Also, the Exodus Refugee Immigration of Indianapolis are the ones who are helping the Burmese refugees. They are largely Baptist, they're extremely religious, and they haven't quite mastered transportation. And I actually texted her and said, let me read you this quote. And she said, that is so true. They have a very difficult time getting around out here because they are used to walking everywhere. They don't even own cars, so they don't know about cars, they don't know how to maintain cars, they don't know how to get a car, they don't know how to drive a car, they don't know how to strap their kids in, they don't know any of these things. So that one I thought was a bit right on. The next one about their religion. Now, this is a quote out of this article that I found from spring of this year. They were pastors and they ran a church out of their home. They would pray. They would use pillows on the air vents and the walls because if anyone outside could hear praying, you could get caught and shut down, she said. It was not easy to be a Christian there. And then after I typed that, I closed my eyes and I thank God that I live where I live. Because I can't imagine this kind of persecution. I can't imagine this kind of life. And so I'm excited to support this culture group and these families for doing what they think is right to better their own family. One of the celebrations that they have is down in Atlanta, Georgia. Mrs. Donnelly reports that the students at Thompson Crossing work for weeks to get their outfits ready, to get their songs ready, to get all of the things ready that they need to get to take this down to Atlanta and celebrated Chin National Day down there. And it said it was the 62nd last year. So this has been around for quite a while, just not here in our town, in our state. In conclusion, I wanted to leave you a quote. Margaret Mead is a cultural anthropologist, and here's something that I'd like to leave you with. As the traveler who has once been from home is wiser than he or she who has never left his own doorstep, so a knowledge of one another's culture should sharpen our ability to scrutinize more steadily, to appreciate more lovingly our own. Thank you.